I like the introductions اللي بنبلشهم for the days. To have a nice introduction for the first day and a nice introduction for the second day. Delving through advanced stuff.
And you always make it different. You know, so how many times now I've seen this course, but you always, you know, very good to make it different each time.
رهيب رزان. I know. شوفوا أنا my type is I don't like to repeat the same thing twice. يعني it always is, I always unconsciously find a new angle to tackle things with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
People need to catch up with you, I think.
You can see Razan how many details are coming on the way.
Yeah.
يعني بس دعواتكم بدي لأنه because there is a lot of work. It is a lot of work.
يلا we all with you إن شاء الله supporting.
إن شاء الله قدها.
إن شاء الله بإذن.
All right, guys. So now we've reached this chapter, overcoming resistance. Okay, and this is a funny story actually, and I still remember the session very well. Sometimes we're faced up with a client who is smart, and sometimes, as in this case, this client was referred to me. It wasn't a patient who knew me previously, so this patient was referred to me by someone. So he did not know anything about me, and naturally, he did have a lot of resistance, and it was kind of like a test. So he came with that attitude, and if we see here, if you're already a therapist, you probably know that you don't necessarily have to encounter an easygoing patient, especially if the patient was referred to you by someone else and did not come willingly to seek help. So this person came through someone else, and it was kind of like he was kind of testing ground, check things out. So you'll also notice that even the patients who seek help can also exhibit conscious and unconscious forms of resistance. We were just talking about this, how some people wear a mask or actually convince themselves and are extremely good actors, especially when it comes to for ideologies and spirituality, etc., etc. So just like we were talking briefly before, some people would can say, I completely forgive people, my heart is pure, etc. While this is like they're actually going completely towards the wrong direction, because we start off with as an angry person, and instead of resolving the problem, we wear the hat of ideologies to say that we are the good people, and instead of resolving things, and we take ourselves farther and farther apart from people by just separating ourselves morally and religiously, or etc. So there's nothing wrong with morals and religion, of course, but it's in our attitude when we are extremely judgmental towards everybody else. Like I see myself as the good person or religious person or the spiritual person, but what does that make others? So what I'm trying to say, sometimes you are encountered with good actors, with people with extreme resistance, and sometimes people are referred to us, and they're actually, I mean, it is a test. It's like when this person is testing ground with a therapist, and there will be a brief battle of arguments in the beginning until the therapist can prove himself able to prove his competence in doing what he needs to do. So you'll also notice that even the patients who seek help can also exhibit conscious and unconscious forms of resistance, just like we said, that can stand in the way of the process and the course of finding and resolving the correct trauma. It takes a lot of gumption. This is what I'm talking about. It takes a lot of gumption, intelligence to know how to win the argument with the patient and to show them, despite their resistance and despite that sometimes they're extremely intelligent and they made sense of things. So we need to know how to actually win that battle, and it's extremely important. So if a patient was able to provide better argument compared to me as a therapist, I mean, there's nothing for me to do further. I have to be able to win that battle in the beginning of the session, and during actually the session when we are presenting, when we are working on specific traumas. So when it comes to resistance, you'll generally experience two types of patients: those who come willingly to the session seeking help and find it hard to confess or reveal their true feelings, and hence seem to offer counter arguments and intelligent ways to respond to the therapist's attempts to penetrate the problem, just like I said right now. And those referred to the therapist by others, who do not know anything about the therapist and are just coming to test grounds. So needless to say, the first is easier. So the first type of patient is someone who knows about me, who knows what I do, and is coming willingly to seek help. But at the same time, sometimes they can have extreme resistance and good arguments again to justify what they're going through. But the second type of patient might not actually come willingly, referred by someone else. So they are just coming skeptical and, okay, show me what you can do. So needless to say, the first is easier to deal with, and the key to overcoming this resistance usually resides in the therapist's ability to offer sufficient and strong arguments that prove and completely seal the point that he or she is trying to make to the patient. We need to be able to give good arguments, okay, irrefutable arguments, and it's going to be a battle usually. So the following is an example from a session where a resistant patient was referred to me by a relative. Okay, so let's see this example. Okay, this patient was going through a deep state of depression due to repetitive failures that occurred to him during the past years. So he went through a lot of failures, financially speaking, and he was extremely depressed. He was very successful in business and experienced severe setbacks and couldn't get over the agonies of failing. During the first half of the session, a fascinating conversation took place before we explored his trauma. So we began the session, we started talking, I asked him about his problem, and he started explaining, and a very interesting conversation took place. And the conversation was, so the guy failed, he experienced setbacks, and he was extremely depressed for it. I began by telling him, okay, you know that many of the greatest men in history experienced setbacks and even experienced bankruptcy multiple times before they went on to succeed again. You already have the experience. So yeah, you're not the only person who experienced setbacks. A lot of extremely successful people went through that, and they, succeeded again. So why don't you already have the experience, so why don't you just utilize your experience and work your way back up gradually? So the guy was extremely depressed, and he was a little angered, not at me, but generally speaking, he was like, because I'm a complete failure. I am a complete failure. That's simply the problem. I fail at everything I do. So he was trying and attempting, and he kept failing, and he was extremely angry for that. He was extremely depressed. He was challenged financially, and apparently attempted to invest several times during the past couple of years, and ended up losing what was left. So he tried to invest again, he tried to do things, and basically kept ruining things for himself. So, of course, I had to sympathize with him. So I told him, I know that you're at a low point now, but what prevents you from finding a suitable job? Really, really. I mean, he was broke, completely broke, and I'm like, okay, why don't you just find a suitable job, okay, to get a salary temporarily until you just rebuild your wealth, because you do have the experience, you know how to do it. So what prevents you from finding a suitable job to have a stable source of income until you reestablish your own business? You already have the experience, etc. So he's told me, I can't go back to being an employee. So he had some pride, and he's like, I can't go back to being an employee after all that happened. He had a lot of money and status, etc. So how can I go back and be an employee? I can't just do it. Of course, he cannot just stay at home and not do anything. So this was the scenario. He was functioning from the mindset that I will either be as rich as I was before, or I can't just, he was refusing to start from scratch again. So I asked him, so why not? At least for a short while until you get back on track. I mean, you have expenses. Obviously you cannot keep doing this. So you need a stable source of income. And he refused. He was like, I just can't put myself in that place. Impossible. Damn, I can't. Just don't talk about it. So he was concerned about his social status. He cannot put himself in that position. Now it's time for me. See, there's a conversation going on, and there's a battle of arguments. I mean, I have to find a way to convince him that you have to do something, because he's like, I will either invest and make money or just nothing. He doesn't have plan B. That's the only thing that he's willing to do. So I told him, no one's immune from going through something like this. If anything, it hones the level of a person's skills. I remember an example about Henry Ford. I told him, I think there's a famous quote by Henry Ford after the great crash. It was probably, if my memory serves me correctly, after a reporter inquired about his future plans. And now I don't remember the story very well, so I said it. I mean, I think this is how it happened. So when the reporter asked him about his future plans, his response was, and I'm paraphrasing, give me 5 years and I will be back where I was. I mean, even more. Just give me 5 years. He does have the experience. He knows the laws of how to grow wealth by having the right routine, I guess. So he told him, just give me 5 years. In 5 years, I'm going to show you, I'm going to be back where I started and even more. So Henry Ford had the experience and he knew how to make it in the business world, which is why he was certain of the steps he was going to take in order to recover. Now, many of you now know when we talk about, for example, when we talk about the narcissism trauma, there are examples we give in regards to maintaining habits and getting where we want. For example, if I want to become a painter, if I just took 15 minutes, not even 30 minutes, just 15 minutes a day to experiment with painting or experiment with drawing, I'm pretty sure in 6 months I'm going to be good. I'm going to be pretty good, actually, if I did that 15 minutes every single day. So Henry Ford knew that, and he was telling the reporter that I know how to do it. I just need some time, and if I'm just going to keep doing every day what I did in the past, and I need 5 years, I'm going to be back where I was. And that's the secret, guys. There is no secret other than this, actually. Just constructive habits over a period of time. They have to be good habits, of course, but this is the secret, okay? So I was giving this argument to this patient, and his response was, and see how he's intelligent and he's giving me counter arguments, despite the fact that what I'm saying, it makes sense. What I'm saying makes sense. So look how intelligent his counter argument was. He told me, I don't believe so. No, the things that you told me is not really true. I'm like, what makes you say that, really? I mean, it makes sense, perfect sense. He said, because everything is already destined for each one of us. Because everything is destined by God. I mean, someone is destined to be poor, someone is destined to be rich. And his argument is actually intelligence, and it does make sense. So I asked him, what do you mean? He said, I mean that it's all in God's hands. Destiny is written for each one of us. And no matter how hard a person tries, if it's not destined for this person to succeed, then this person will not. Okay? So he gave me a good argument. He told me, no, it's not necessary that if you follow the habits, you're going to succeed, because things are destined. So if you're destined to be rich, if you're destined to succeed, you will succeed despite, you will succeed. If you're not destined to succeed, despite everything you do, you will not succeed. That's what he was saying. And it does make sense. And that's the power of the argument. So now I had to be extremely intelligent, okay? Because if I did not silence him with a good argument, he would have won. And if he won the argument, there's nothing for me to do. I mean, why would we continue the session if I'm not able to prove the point that I'm trying to tell him? See, this is the importance. And this is what we would call the level 2 for the therapist in the ReiK method. I mean, being proficient and becoming more and more proficient in utilizing the right arguments during a conversation with the patient, as well as, of course, the reverse ReiK like we spoke of yesterday. So he gave me this argument, and it was time for me to counter his argument, okay? So he told me, he said what he said about God's and destiny, and I told him, are you saying that the effort a person puts is not a contributing factor to this person's success? He told me, not necessarily. One person might become wealthy despite the fact that he or she does not put a lot of effort, and another might work very hard and yet fail to make it in life. There is destiny. And he's right. There is destiny. So I had to find a very good counter argument. Okay, so I told him, you know that there's a difference between working efficiently and working hard in an efficient manner. For example, I can carry a lot of bricks for 20 years and still remain in the same place, or I can just do things intelligently gradually and I might become a big wholesale dealer, alternatively. So we have to work efficiently. A person who spends his or her life lifting bricks for pay will work extremely hard, but won't probably exceed that mundane daily pay, even if he spent 20 years doing so. So he told me, well, yes, but that's not what I mean. I mean, yeah, I know we have to work efficiently, but that's not what I mean. So I asked him, what do you mean exactly? He said, I mean that our future is destined for us. He's still proving the point that there's destiny by God. Okay, the future is destined for us, and that this destiny will take place regardless of what we do. The problem is, again, his argument is right to most believers, at least, or to all believers. So notice how he uses a strong argument and that he's entirely convinced of its validity. Before I can proceed, I will need to give him a counter argument that will make sense to him and overpower the one he has offered. So I told him, what you're telling me is that our financial status and future is carved in stone for us, and that there's nothing we can do about it. That's what you're telling me. Okay, so I'm making him admit the exact wordings of what he's saying, which is important in many cases. And he said, yes, it's all ordained by God. And notice that he's playing the God card, which is a very strong card. So what I told him, based on that, whoever is destined to be rich, I'm still emphasizing, see? Based on that, whoever is destined to be rich will be rich, and whoever is destined to be poor will be poor, right? And he said, yes. Great. So I told him then, all right, if this was the case, then everyone should simply sit in his or her house and do nothing. Don't you agree? What's the value of doing anything then if everything was completely preordained? So everybody sits in his home, and whatever God wants, whatever destiny wants, and God has written, that will happen, right? So when I told him that, he said, no, of course, one has to do something. See? Yeah, really. I mean, you're telling me that it's all carved in stone, and that it's destined, and that's it. There's nothing for us to do about it. Whoever is meant to be rich will be rich. Whoever is meant to be poor will be poor, and that's it, right? Then everybody should sit in his home and do nothing. That's simply, it makes sense, right? Based on what you told me. And he said, now I won the argument. This is where I won the argument. See? He said, no, of course, one has to do something. I was like, exactly. And although we cannot guarantee what's to come, it's our task to do our best and simply let go. Tawakkal ala Allah. Yeah, it is my task. I will do my best then. I will just leave it to God. But if it's just destined and there's nothing to do about it, why wouldn't we just sit in our homes and do nothing? So then he agreed with me. Don't you agree? And he said, yes, I do. And I won the argument. Okay? So I told him, tell me now, are you really doing your best? He remained silent. He knew that he wasn't. He knew that he was sitting at home, depressed, doing nothing, just blaming things and just feeling bad. He knew it. So he knew that instead of working hard to restore his wealth, he fell into a state of depression and used it as an excuse. He excused himself because he was depressed, because he was feeling bad, and he did not do anything about what he had to do. And because of some pride, he was not able also to figure out ways to make like good stable income until he fixes what was broken. So I elaborated in here. I told him, don't you think that the right way to do things is by finding a proper job to guarantee a stable income for a while until you rebuild your business gradually the way it was? And he agreed. He told me, probably. It's just so hard for me to do this after all that happened. So I won the argument in here, and I was able to continue with the session and figure out the traumas and just work on them. Still, of course, he has a choice. He will either go and start working, or maybe he would just find more excuses to remain in his comfort zone and not do anything about it. So we proceeded with the session normally. So in order to overcome his resistance, my task, as you've seen, was to set up arguments that were good enough before I was able to continue to navigate into his different traumas. If I did not win the argument, he wouldn't have respected me, and we wouldn't have been able to continue with the session. I mean, I can't prove my point, so what's the value of continuing with the session? Once that was accomplished, it was easy to get past the resistance, and we could continue with the session appropriately. And this is extremely important. It's a skill that the therapist will develop through practice and through exposure to a lot of sessions and examples and different scenarios. And we need to be quick in figuring out good arguments as we speak to patients. This is, and usually this is a very vital stage during the sessions. So guys, now we will learn how to perform the ReiK method, which speaks of the 7 steps that we have streamlined in order to have it be practical and easy for anybody, whether a therapist or not, to be able to apply it correctly. So how to perform the ReiK method? It was explained in earlier chapters that the ReiK method focuses primarily on taking the patient back to a time that preceded the first onset of the trauma that is being explored. Remember, like we said, we are looking for the pre-state, okay? So, which is why we establish a timeline. We utilize a blind procedure to go to the first incident and we get a confirmation from the patient that this is actually and indeed the first incident, which means, and this is what we care about, which means that briefly before, even seconds before, even 10 seconds before, this feeling was not present. And this enables us to give an irrefutable proof to the patient on an unconscious level that there was a time where the problem wasn't there. And this alone is enough to have the patient doubt the premise of his problem or her problem. See? So the pre-state, going for the pre-state, is the main target that we intend to do by applying the ReiK method. So when the patient succeeds in doing that and experiences that emotional state that was present briefly before his or her traumatizing event, this patient's perception of the problem begins to shift immediately. This is precisely what the therapist should be looking to do in every session, and is exactly what the composed steps are set to accomplish. Okay, so we talked about this before. To begin with the session, the therapist will, of course, need to ask the patient to describe. Of course, now we're talking about the 7 steps, okay? So when the patient comes for the session, definitely we will be asking that patient to describe the problem, okay? If the patient mentions multiple ones, if the patient tells me, I have a problem with this and that, we have to prioritize and choose the most dominant one. So the therapist should keep asking the patient to look for the problem that is most significant or dominant or relevant to him or her at the time being, because we cannot deal with several problems at the same time. Once the most relevant problem is selected, the therapist can then proceed, okay? So now with the steps. Step 1, start with a recent incident. So let's say a patient came to me and told me that I have a problem with X or Y. I would definitely begin by asking the patient, okay, when was the last time that you experienced this? Because I do need to summon the emotional state, and I do need to begin drawing a timeline through which I will work. So asking for the recent incident or the most recent incident is usually what we start with, remember. Now, these are the 7 steps that make the method practical. But with experience, sometimes we might change the way we access the pre-state. Sometimes we only do it by providing specific logical arguments. So there are different ways to doing this. But this is a very practical way that has been time-tested. So step 1, start with a recent incident. At the beginning of the session, the therapist will talk briefly to the patient for a basic understanding of the problem, of course, and then ask the patient about a recent incident during which the problem was experienced. Once that's identified, the therapist will ask the patient to relive that incident as if it's happening right now. Remember, we want to summon the emotional state, because without having that emotions present, we will not be able to track it backwards and go for the first time it was experienced. So we do need to determine the dominant emotion. Sometimes it's easy and sometimes it's confusing. Remember the case with testing the opposite that we spoke of? Sometimes the emotion is not clear. Sometimes it's very clear, like in fear of the dark. That's a clear emotion. But sometimes we're not actually certain, as in that case where he was intimidated or afraid to tell his manager, not because he's afraid of his manager, the case with testing the opposite, but because he did not want his manager to change his view of him in regards to being materialistic, etc. So,
excuse me here,
yeah.
because even when I read that in the book and when I started practicing it, I was facing a little bit confusion. Do you want to only determine the emotions, or do you want the client to live the emotions? Because for some of them, I can pinpoint the emotions easily, but they don't live it because they are disconnected.
No, definitely live the emotion. Experience the emotion.
To experience.
Yeah. which is why we test the opposite, for example, because we want the person to close his eyes or her eyes and just, we need to see the facial gestures. We need to see that person experiencing that emotion.
One of the cases that I worked with, no matter what I was doing, triggering, living the emotions, imagining the scene, she was totally calm. I couldn't trigger the emotions. I can't pinpoint them.
She wasn't able to summon the emotion. Can you tell us
You mean
what the
like
problem was about? Can you tell us what the problem was?
sexual harassment?
Okay. Yeah, definitely that's a tricky one.
Yeah.
There is a case in the book. I don't know if you've read it. about
I've
sexual
read
harassment.
everything about sexual harassment because these couple of cases were so complicated for me. I couldn't reach 100% to the relief.
We will get to that case later when we explore the cases in the book. But you will be surprised, Osama. Sexual harassment, if it wasn't someone like a close person, like someone from the direct family, is actually easy to handle. Very easy to handle. Maybe 10 minutes would do it.
Yeah, the most easy trauma. The most easy trauma.
If it wasn't from the family, do you mean when it is a relative or something to, because it was about a relative and it was recurring during her life with different people? What was misleading in this case specifically is, and I know we will not be posting this because I don't want the client to see maybe some of the details, but you don't know her anyway. So what was misleading is that she said, what I felt from her words is that she wasn't even shocked, or there was a kind of agreement. She wasn't rejecting because it was
cases like that.
Yeah. Because it was recurring. Maybe the first time was shocking, but when we began with the recent occasion, and she was like hiding other.
Okay with it. She's almost
Yeah.
enjoying it.
Yeah, and there was the blame that she's having.
So she's taking the love and the attention from that and the guilt at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Yeah. This happens actually, and we did experience several cases like this. Now, there's something important. You remember on the first yesterday when we spoke of the willpower and the ability to forgive. These are things that are separate from traumas. They're decisions that we make, right? So there's something. There's another thing similar to that, which is the moral fiber of the person, your ability or your willingness to do what's right and to commit to what's right.
The moral what?
Fiber, like our
Fiber.
moral choices. See.
Yeah. Okay.
So she's feeling guilty, of course, and she has mixed emotions because she's doing something that she doesn't approve of.
Yeah, it was the most intense because it was recurrent with the same person. She's not rejecting that, but it happened many times in her life with different people. That's why it became like familiar. So she didn't pronounce the word. She said it was familiar, and from there we detected the other cases because she was even hiding the other cases, and she's saying I was only there and it was recurrent. I don't know what happened, but it was obvious that there was other occasions.
Yeah.
And when we detected, they appeared. But as I told you, she was not rejecting it, and there was the big guilt or shame. It was the emotion exactly was the shame. She was ashamed from herself, but no facial expressions, nothing. She was 100% okay.
Okay, that's great. I'm gonna answer this with a case. Okay.
Okay.
I did have a guy, patient, okay, who had a situation where he would cheat on his wife, and he would do it again, and he is feeling guilty. And he came for the session. He had other problems, and we were working on them, specifically problems with him and his wife. And we were working on the traumas, and we doing well. Okay. Towards the end of the session, it's like, I mean, he almost got divorced because of what he's doing. Okay. And he had traumas, and we worked on them. And we got to a point where towards the end, he was like, almost as if he's trying to seek approval from me to do it again.
Oh.
See?
Yeah.
He's like, so what if I, okay?
Yeah.
I immediately interrupted him. I'm like, you cannot do that. You cannot do that.
Yes.
That was the answer. You cannot. There are things there are boundaries in life. I cannot just like this car and take it. There are boundaries, and that's the ethical and moral fiber. I mean, if you do something wrong, of course there are consequences. This is not a trauma. You have to be responsible for what you do. You have to do the right thing to the best of your extent, of course. But you cannot do that. You cannot just go and cheat again. You cannot ask for permission to do that. See, no matter how I mean, how I wouldn't say how good it makes you feel, but no matter how you would justify it. See,
Okay, but
so there is
in
no
this case,
justification.
he's an adult, but for her, that incident happened back when she was 11 years old.
Yeah.
So she didn't have the choice, but she's blaming herself as an adult because it was recurring with her agreements, maybe.
Yes, exactly. So it was traumatizing in the beginning, but apparently she did cross the boundaries of her moral fibers.
Yeah.
That's what happened. So you're dealing with two things in here. You are dealing with a trauma, which we can definitely work with, and usually it's easy. Sexual harassment usually is easy. It's an easy trauma to work with. Like we said, except for the case when it's a close member in the family, which causes them to lose trust in that safe place.
Uh-huh.
Okay, that's a different case. But you're dealing with the other aspect as well. A person who's willing to do something that they don't think is right, and there's no session for that. There's just one answer. You cannot do that.
Uh-huh.
If you want to do it, you will live with the consequences, but it's wrong. It's wrong. A thief cannot come and ask for a justification to do something, to steal, right?
So going back to this step one, how can we trigger the emotions here?
Beautiful, dear. So maybe it's probably, and I think the older therapists who are with us right now agree with me, maybe she's not feeling anything because she's actually enjoying it. She's not traumatized.
No, she mentioned this is the worst incident of all because it was recurrent. But the one that was recent.
That happened when she was 11 years old.
Yeah.
Okay.
She stopped that. After that, she was opposed to one sexual harassment and she rejected. She was happy that she did that at one point in her life, but it was recurring in her life, and it is logical how it recurred in her life because it is a trauma.
Yeah, definitely. It's a trauma. What I meant to say is she's not feeling it, not because it's not traumatizing at the first time. It's because she's doing it later and she's
without rejection.
Exactly. Yes. Because she's crossing her moral boundary, which is why she probably is talking to you and not being able exactly to summon the right emotions.
She was hiding, yes.
Yeah, because she's doing it, because she's doing it and she's probably enjoying it. That's a moral boundary. Okay, but in regards to the trauma, it's extremely normal if you go to that first incident when she was 11 years old and you ask her to look at the person's face and just go gradually with the timeline. Okay, so what's happening? What time? He's in front of you. Look at his face. What's happening? If you go gradually with the timeline, I mean, it's just extremely normal for her to burst and to start expressing her emotions, maybe cry. This is what should happen if she tries to recall the very first incident step by step. So did you do that with her?
I did.
Change in scenario.
I tried to go into the details because I feel like guilty if I go with the details.
Yeah.
But we did. And she said, it was recurrent. Even I remember at 4 years old, she remembered an incident when we did the blind procedure. We began as a blind procedure. Then she said, no, I can remember the details of this. And then 3 years old, she was hesitating, but I couldn't reach a point where she was really normal, a normal kid, not feeling the disconnection with the trust or something. I can't put it in even.
This you can do, Osama, by just telling her, are you telling me, for example, you can tell her the exact wordings. Are you telling me that when you were 1.5 years, you did not run around the house happily?
Maybe I missed this exact time.
This usually seals it because, again, whatever we tell the patient has to make sense. We cannot impose our thoughts. It just has to make sense. And this is how we trap the conversation.
Okay.
Exactly.
And then you also check the forgiveness and the anger and the other
They
things?
should come, yeah. And we will talk about the case, the specific case about sexual harassment when we go through the cases in the book.
Okay.
We'll talk about it,
Yeah, thank you.
So here, instead of going back to find out where she lived a normal life, we assume that she did. Is that what you're saying, Mohammed?
Logically speaking,
We assume a time in the patient's life where things were normal if they couldn't go back and remember.
to give them evidence that there was a time when they were like spontaneous children. And luckily, this is almost true in every case. You will very rarely find out that someone who was 1.5 years old wasn't actually a child who ran around the house and smiled and just was normal. It's almost in every case, which is to our benefit, of course, because we do need statistical evidence to prove things to the patients.
So if they cannot remember, we assume they were, and we tell them we think you were, definitely.
No, we don't then think you were. Do you see the words? The wordings.
Okay, so
I said, are you telling me that you weren't blah 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 when you were 1.5 years? So I wouldn't impose thoughts.
All
But I'm
right.
presenting a very
Also, using the possibility, there was a possibility in your life that you were living as a normal child, maybe. This is logical.
We can, but you need to be more specific because it's a vague term. Is there a possibility that you were normal at one point in your life?
Or at the age of 1, or you can be specific about the age, but to make it a possibility.
I don't think I would need to ask it this way because probably 1.5 years you were running around the house and feeling spontaneous.
Okay.
See, it's really very vital the way we choose the words.
I think to remove the guilt as well, because she feel inside she's really bad person. You need to tell her, you did that when you was a child because you take it as a love and attention. You didn't take it as a sexual meaning. So that's remove her guilt, show her you are not a bad person. And then what I find work as well with, sexual things, like it's changing the scenario, like repeating the scenario, but like the perfect way. Like, okay, that's what happened, but now you protect yourself. You didn't allow this person to do this. And I don't know why this is always when you change the scenario, it did work.
Yeah, okay. Fair. Thank you, Rizwan.
Okay, I have a question regarding the living experience. Can it be re-traumatizing in extreme cases like, let's say, rape cases or more violent cases? How do you tackle the incident without maybe telling the person to relive it, or is it another way to work with it?
It's actually important to relive it. It's actually important to face it, to go through it, and to resolve emotion. This is the problem. The problem is that the emotion is bottled, and there's layers of resistance, and in the words of William ReiK, armorings, even muscular armorings in the body, due to that extreme emotion. So we will not be able to resolve it if we did not go and face it. But what's the difference between what we do and what other methods might do? Other methods might ask the patient to scream and get angry and express the emotions. Okay, we don't do that. We can easily apply the reverse ReiK and show them that and get the relief without having to go through that. Sometimes it is good to cry a little, to express a little, and sometimes it happens, just like the case that I told you about, which happened with me yesterday. So, but it wasn't a tantrum. It was a lot of emotions coming, controlled in a way, and we went with the flow, and we spoke about it as it happened. See, so we need it's up to the experience of the therapist to know when to let it and when to know that it's just a circle that will never, okay, let me tell you what actually happened with us for years and years and years. Okay, this was between the year 2000, probably 2005 and maybe 2012. Okay, between that period. And some of the exercises that we attempted and tried was going to every week to a place, to a farm outside the city, and to allow everybody to just express their emotions and explode completely. Like go scream and shout and curse and do whatever you want. Just express your emotions. Don't keep anything inside. And so we did that for years, okay? Weekly. Sometimes maybe twice a week, okay? So we did that for years. Did it help? A little bit. Did the problem go away? No, it didn't. Because the moment they were back to their homes, the moment they were interacting again with their families, that anger came back. And sometimes they even burst in an unsuitable way because they took the permission to start expressing their anger. And it came sometimes in many scenarios. It came in the wrong way. So expressing emotions is important. The emotions is important, but at the same time, resolving the traumas is what we want. Okay, but at the same time, anger is a choice. You see, is a choice. Forgiving is a choice. So I can keep expressing this anger forever until I decide to forgive. Till I decide to say it's okay. I completely forgive. Where's the problem in that? The problem is that forgiving is a very tough thing to do. The word forgive is very hard on the mind. We really cannot digest that word easily because it entails with it that the person who did the harm to us is not going to be punished.
That's true.
That's why it's very hard to. We don't even in the ReiK method, we don't use the word forgive. We utilize the words. Can you look at that person and have your heart be pure despite everything? Because you do believe, because God made you go through this experience for a reason. Let God do the work in terms of karma, okay? But if you look at that person, is there a single possibility to be able to look at that person and have your heart be completely pure towards him or her, okay? These are the words we utilize. We do not use the word forgive. And when we do that, we start asking the statistical question, the reverse ReiK question, until we get a confirmation. At the moment this person tells us, yes, there has to be a possibility for me to look with a completely pure heart, which means if I saw that person, I'll be comfortable. So my heart is pure despite everything, even if he did not change. So this is how we phrase it. And we discover every single time that the moment we give a confirmation, we feel actually better. We feel relieved, okay? But what's left is to practice it. Because when we go and we are exposed to people, sometimes the anger comes back, especially that most people who have these problems do not actually have a lot of social skills, which is why they bottle their emotions. So it's very normal for them for the emotions to return, which is why they have to keep practicing it and practicing it and practicing it so that in few months, okay, it becomes part of them. They become like an extroverted person. They easygoing. You just don't hold a grudge. They don't hold it in their hearts. They don't bottle emotions. They know how to handle things. They know how to be strong and respectful at the same time. It takes a little while to develop these social skills. You see, that's the difference. So
The thing, Muhammad, with forgiveness is it's always in my mind. For example, if I forgive that person, that means they're going to get away with what they have done to me.
truth is they wouldn't. See, I'm giving you now an argument. Truth is they wouldn't. Karma will come back. Every person, no matter how nice you were, if you did something wrong, it's going to come back to you. So, which is why if someone did something wrong, he's gonna or she's gonna see it in a way or another. But it's not my task to feel angry. It's my task to have my heart be pure and be a strong person and let just things take place. But if I was...
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, say it here.
So you're saying karma comes back. Karma will catch up with them. And I agree with you. But at the same time, Mohammed, I don't feel like I got justice. Like, what would you do in that situation? What was the counter argument?
You have to trust in God. You have to trust in God. No, this is another thing. I know some people would say I'm not a believer, right? But it's really hard when you don't have when you don't function from that perspective. But you can say it actually. It's we get patients sometimes who are not believers, and we do tell them that there is balance in nature, and the world, the universe would not actually function if there was not balance. And somehow we would convince them that karma does exist and that things will come back to that person, but it's not my task to be angry.
So here I have one last question. I don't want to extend my questions more, but when you said about the karma, in this case, that she told me that some of them died and she's feeling that revenge. Do you resist these emotions, or do you say this is the karma and this is the justice of Allah maybe, and it will happen, and that's a proof that it is happening, so you just have to clear your heart?
Not, you know, Saima, not, it's basically not to interfere with the outcomes. Really, my task is to have my heart be pure despite everything and be a strong person. That's very important as well, because a lot of people think that if my heart is pure, if I forgive all the time, I'm gonna allow other people to hurt me. I will allow other people to hurt me, and no, of course not. I have to be a strong person, a respectful person, okay? And then, which means nobody will be able to hurt me. Okay, I did have experiences in the past, but for in the future, I will never allow anybody to hurt me or do something bad to me. Okay, but at the same time, my heart is pure, despite everything, because God made me go through that experience for a reason. So when I look at that person, I'm not saying forgive. I'm saying my emotions are neutral, which means if I was sitting with that person, I'm relaxed. Really, I'm relaxed. I'm just comfortable. And even the people who do something wrong, they will learn eventually. Maybe they will learn today, tomorrow, maybe next life. I don't know. But they will learn eventually, because we are all children of the light. And we will one day realize the problem and fix it, and let's say clear our karmic debt. Whether it's now or later, I don't know. But it's the same case for all of us. So I'm presenting this from a believer perspective, okay? But sometimes we have to present it to people who do not believe, and it's their right, who are not believers. We have to choose the words correctly to convince them, because it has to make sense, and it can be done easily.
So here are some of the logical things that I shared with her, is that each one of us has the bright side and the dark side. No one is 100% bright and having an angelic maybe behavior. But it's a matter of time when your darkness maybe will appear, and it is because of some struggles you lived in the past. So no one is perfect. We make mistakes, and just to let it go. But what I felt after the session, she reported, because we began with physical, I work with physical issues, and we ended up with this. But she reported improvement in the physical issues. But I'm wondering, in such cases, since I know that I didn't do it perfectly, what to do the next session? Do you revisit the incidents?
Great.
Or,
okay, in many cases, in most of the cases, okay, so you were trying to justify why that person did something wrong, right?
Not justify, it's like,
to show how things go. I mean, for humans.
But sometimes this happens, but yes.
What I found, or now, because I did try to do that in the past, but what I prefer to do right now is just throw the question at them at the same time, right away. I would tell them.
The question story, I didn't.
The reverse right question. Okay, I would just throw. Okay, so I would tell them. They would explain that this and that, this and that, this and that happened to me, and I would say, okay, I'm not gonna justify. I'm not going to start explaining. I'm not going to start to give you any arguments. I'm just going to tell you, despite that, despite everything, is there a single possibility for you to look at that person, have your heart be completely pure, no questions asked? Your task is to be a strong person, to force other people to respect you. Things happen divinely for a reason. Your task, no questions asked, despite what happens, is there a single possibility for you to look at that person, even if he or she did not change, okay, and have your heart be pure towards them? I would just throw the question. And of course, they're going to be resistant. You
revisit the incidents and then throw this question, or immediately after speaking maybe a little bit?
I throw it whenever I see strong emotions, like strong anger, strong heartbreak, strong feelings. Like, for example, someone is mad at his parents or her parents, because of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things happened in life. I'm not going to try to justify.
Yeah, I totally got this, but if it was not the first session, it's like this: we didn't finish the work, and she's coming the next session.
Exactly.
Do you revisit and
If she
send
still
her
has the
emotions
emotions.
again?
Exactly.
Yeah.
If she still has the emotions, that's as simple as that. You can tell her, okay, despite these feelings, despite what happened, despite the fact that they may not change, despite the fact that they may not be punished. See, even
Yeah.
I would just go to the extreme. Is there a single possibility for you to look at them and have your heart be completely pure? Completely pure. Okay? Just let go of things. Let God handle it. Okay?
And there
Is
the
there a
shift
single
will happen.
possibility?
You will
Yeah, but of course
immediately
usually-
notice the relaxation.
Exactly. Oh my God. but usually asking the question for the first time this way would not yield the result.
Yeah, after repeating it,
I
because
have to repeat it several times. And now I will give you the second form of the question that we do because it's important. So this is like an introduction to the steps. That's fine. So the second question I would say, because most people would give me a lot of resistance. No, I mean, how is there a possibility, even though that person wouldn't, they would just have, of course, it wouldn't be easy at the first time.
Yeah.
So then I would throw the second form, the second way I ask the question. I would tell them, okay, let's imagine there are like millions of universes, billions of parallel universes. And in physics, sometimes they say that, whether it's true or not, I don't care, but they say it in physics. There are billions of universes. And in every single one of those billions of universes, there's a copy of you, okay, that went through the exact same thing. There's just a copy of you that went through the exact same experience. Is there a single possibility that there's just one copy between those billions of copies who has attained enough maturity to say, I went through this experience for a reason. God made me go through it for a reason. Okay, yeah, I will always be a strong person and always act correctly. Nobody will be able to hurt me from this moment on. But if I look at that person, despite everything, even if they do not change, there's a possibility, of course, for one copy of me in one of the universes to look at that person, have her or his heart be completely pure, despite everything, even if he does not change. Okay. Now, what I would say, like, let all the other copies say, no, there's no way I would forgive. But is there a possibility there's just one copy in one of these universes who has attained this level of maturity? And almost in every single case, you can sense it, Osaima.
Yeah, I can feel
sense
it.
it. There's no way for the patient to say, no, it wouldn't. Every patient will say, yeah, there has to be one copy, right?
Okay, yeah.
What they do not know is that we trick them. Because the moment they say, yes, there is one copy, the moment they say it, okay, if you just ask them, tell them, okay, imagine the person in front of you right now and just tell me what you feel. And they will laugh and they will tell you, actually, I feel different. It's almost in every single case. What we did is trick the unconscious mind.
So you let them imagine all the people that did that to them, or just the most triggering incident, like in her case, the recent.
You have to be specific, yeah, because if you work in general, you will not be able to specify. It would be hard to resolve anything if you do not specify a specific problem.
But then you can check with the other incidents.
Of course.
Maybe after the relaxation, do you feel like?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And in this specific case, remember that she was hurt in the beginning, but she crossed her moral boundary afterwards. Okay, so it's a mixed feeling. It's a mixed problem.
Yeah. Thank you. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
100% logically.
See, they cannot say no, but what they don't know is that if at the moment they say yes, they're tricked. They will relax. No,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Figured.
في نقطة أستاذ محمد إذا فيني أعلق عليها. أستاذ هلا بالنسبة كمان للأشخاص اللي حكيت عنهم إنه ما بيآمنوا بالأشياء هاي وكذا، في أشخاص فعلا هيك قريبين مني، يمكن حتى أنا كنت من الأشخاص هذول، بس بعدين بفضلك يعني تغيرت الأمور كلها. فالمهم لما هذول الأشخاص يعني مرة هيك حاولت من هيك أشخاص، بصراحة لقيت نقطة إني يمكن أدخل من خلالها هي إن يكون يعني بمعنى إنه يكون براغماتيك لهم، يعني لمصلحتك من نهاية الشغلة. أنت ليش بدك تتمسك بشعور معين اللي هو هذا الشخص اللي أذاه، خلينا نفترض ينباع بالعذاب، يعني من الآخر هيك يعني ينباع بالعذاب يستفيد. النهاية شو حتكون نهايته؟ ما نبي إحنا ما نحس هذا الشخص، بس بما أنت بالنهاية رح تضل أنت بتستمر بهذا الشعور، يعني أنت حابب يضل معك، فمن هون بدخله يعني لمصلحتك بالنهاية الموضوع. بتحب أنت تغير هذا الشعور، في عندك عندك هيك احتمال، ممكن تحط هيك احتمال عندك. فمن هالناحيه هي كاني انواع استفدت منها يعني بصراحه لما ضبطها. يعني ما بعرف شو رايك بالطريقه هي.
طبعا. Yeah, of course, Mu'taz. I mean, what you're telling him is that if you keep doing this, you're hurting yourself. You're not hurting
Yeah,
others.
I use the same thing. I use it
That's
as
a
well.
good argument. That's a good argument. But it's a good argument, but it wouldn't necessarily cause this person to clear his heart against what's happening. And that's what we want. We want this person to really clear his heart. And the moment we trick him or her into saying yes, that there is a possibility, something actually happens. Something happens. And it's very effective in the cases where there is anger, and it's very effective in the cases where there is heartbreak. Like in the case with the woman that actually initiated the reverse ReiK procedure.
What if the person does not want to forgive?
We still ask that possibility question, and we have them say, yes, there has to be one possibility, exactly like I demonstrated briefly before. So the moment they say there has to be one copy, of course, okay, they will relax. And they have to practice doing that every time they get those strong emotions, because it is a skill. Controlling our emotions and handling them this way is a skill which has to be developed over a few months, and we have to explain that to the patient. Now, this is something we do when we do the primary narcissism session, because when we finish the primary session, we give them homework to prove that they are able to do to associate with people and clear their hearts, and to prove that they are able to commit to certain habits, okay, without playing victim. The minimum of the habits.
So, Mohammed, when you spoke about the moral boundaries, this is another aspect of the trauma. So she may have this relaxation, instant relaxation, improve a little bit, but there is more work to be done on the crossing the boundaries, the moral boundaries, that's feelings.
There has to be some discipline. There has to be discipline. It is a choice, after all. If she wants to keep crossing her moral boundary, it's her choice. But you have to give her the straightforward code that things cannot be crossed. I mean, you cannot do that. I mean, you have the choice to do so, but you cannot do that.
Yeah.
Just like the person who told me that he was like, if I feel like cheating on my wife, I'm like, no, you cannot do that.
No, she didn't show something like this because I told you it was in her past, and she think that, she put a boundary then after that. Yeah. So do you check, or you just leave it since now she's an adult and she...
It depends. Yeah, it depends on what bothers her right now. Okay. I mean, if it's not something that's bothering her, if it's in the past and I mean it's over, maybe it's not in her best interest to talk about it. It depends.
So, in the follow-up, you usually check what is still stuck there.
You can check what happened based on the previous session, and you can check what's bothering you right now, or what's left, or is there anything bothering you? And based on that, you can continue with the session. Yeah.
Perfect.
As a therapist, we do not impose our belief. We do not impose our thoughts. We have to go in the line of what the patient wants, and of course their belief system, etc. We have to respect that.
Of course. Yeah, of course. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. Right, guys, we finished another hour. So how about we take only 5 minutes? Okay. And afterwards, we will just strictly go with the book to finish the steps, because we do need to finish the steps today, so that tomorrow we can go with few cases and give a brief explanation of the reverse ReiK and the narcissism trauma. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
So we'll take 5 minutes. And we'll continue afterwards with the steps. So let's continue. And step 1, start with the recent incident. Okay. So like we said, in order to summon the emotion, we had a very interesting discussion just now. And in order to summon the emotion, one of the best ways is to ask the patient to tell us about the most recent incident where that problem was experienced. And by asking that patient to relive the experience, we will be summoning the emotion. Sometimes we would ask them to close their eyes, to just imagine being there. We would ask them for details about the place, the people around them, and we will really meticulously notice the gestures on their faces, just to make sure that they are actually summoning the exact emotion that we want to work with. So once that's identified, the therapist will ask the patient to relive the incident as if it's happening right now, making sure this patient can summon and experience the same feelings that were present during the event. Having those feelings present at the session is crucial. We cannot work if the patient is not actually feeling the emotions that we want to work with, because it's going to be extremely vague. It has to be a point of interest at this very moment. It has to be summoned. In a lot of cases, sometimes when I have recurring patients, when we begin, I know that the problem is still there, but sometimes they're just not feeling it at the moment. So I would revisit certain memories to have them summon the exact emotions that we want to work with. Having those feelings present at the session is crucial before the therapist can continue, which is why it's important to begin with this step. For example, so let's continue with this step. I think, this is the case where the person was afraid of the dark. So we're going to be utilizing this case to explain the steps of the method. You do remember we talked about it briefly when we spoke of the blind procedure. So we'll continue. Now let's assume that this patient came and explained to me that he's extremely afraid of the dark and he's embarrassed because he's an adult and he shouldn't be doing that. And once we established the premise, I would ask him, okay, when was the last time you experienced those fears? Of course, it's the fear of the dark, so it's usually the last night. Or maybe he wasn't actually when he was attempting to sleep. Maybe he was going through an alley or going through... It's not my task to determine. He will tell me the most recent time he felt those fears and which was significant to him. So the patient told me 2 days ago when I was attempting to sleep, I was alone and it was completely dark. I usually sleep with the lights on when I'm alone, but the lights happened to be off that day. So I asked him, how did you feel? He said, I was afraid. I can't help but picture bad things. So it's a typical case where someone is trying to sleep, he keeps the lights on, and if he turns the lights off, he can't help but experience, imagine things coming at him, scary things, etc. So it's a very classic case. So I told him, I want you to go back to that moment. It's a clear emotion, but still, why not? Let me ask him more and have him really experience, even in part, that kind of fear in front of me so we can work on it in a better way. So I told him, I want you to go back to the moment when you were in bed. It's completely dark. Imagine being there, look around and tell me what you feel. The therapist is attempting to have the patient summon the emotion, just like we said. It's frightening, he told me. I keep imagining bad things coming out of the corners of the room, monstrous faces. So he's telling me that he imagines scary things, monsters coming from the corners of the room. So I told him I still want the emotion to be more present to him at the moment. So I told him, I want you to imagine that you're there right now. Take your time to do this. Close your eyes. Imagine that you're in bed. Look around you at the darkness and tell me how you feel. I'm looking at the gestures of his face as we talk. Have those feelings present in order to proceed. Imagine being in bed. It's completely dark and look around the room. Okay, so he took the time to do it. Like we said, we just want the emotions to be present. And then he told me, and then I told him, how do you feel? Can you say that you're able to summon the same feelings that are present when you're there? He said, yeah, I can say so. Yes, I think I do feel how it feels to be there in real time. So I do feel uncomfortable as I imagine myself in total darkness, and I can't help but imagine things coming out. So the sensations are there, which will enable us to proceed. So step number 2, which is related to step number 1, we have to determine the exact emotion we want to work with, because with this emotion, we're going to ask him to go backwards in time. So step 2 is determining the dominant emotion. Of course, the dominant emotion in this trauma is quite clear because it's fear of the dark. There's little confusion in that. Maybe the person would have other reasons, but for now, it seems to be very simple. To navigate through the patient's memories, the therapist will need to ask questions about the first traumatic event that involved this feeling in hand. For this, the therapist needs to make sure that he or she is backtracking with the correct emotion. We cannot go backwards without choosing the correct emotion. which can generally be as easy as asking a question like, how do you feel as you imagine yourself in that position? However, sometimes, as in the case that involved testing the opposite, the emotion was confusing. So, however, sometimes it can get trickier, and therapists can explore further to look for any words that can reveal the correct feelings during the conversation. So if there were numerous emotions involved, if the patient had different emotions that are involved, we must choose the most dominant one. So the therapist should keep exploring until a dominant emotion is determined, because we have to determine the exact emotion to go with. There are many cases where we start with something and then we notice something more dominant, and consequently we switch to that emotion and go backwards with it. It happens a lot.
So don't you think that also a mix of emotions can be related to the same thing?
Yes,
different
there,
emotions,
but we have to determine a dominant one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's shame, guilt, or what is the most dominant in this?
Yeah, because sometimes it starts off with fear, for example, fear with people. Okay.
Yeah.
And then, like, it happened with you once. It turned out to be distrust in people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So it's not that I'm afraid of people. It's not that I do not trust people. So it would be more beneficial to go with that emotion.
And if I may, sometimes there's an emotion that comes as a defense for another emotion. For example, maybe there's a state in sadness, and the emotion that we work with is anger that's more in front, hiding the sadness behind.
100%. So I'm trying to recall a case to tell you about. I think it was a case of someone who had like a very tensed vocal cords. He cannot speak freely when with people because he feels like something is like clenching his throat. So if I remember correctly, I did write this down in one of the self-ReiK sheets because I'm collecting examples for it. So I think what happened was we started off by looking for the source or the reason for this by testing the opposite, of course. So we would test the opposite and have that person speak freely. Oh yeah, now I remember. So it was a case of he felt that his throat is clenched, okay? But once we tested the opposite, what turned out to be is that it's not, the sensation is not dominant in here. It is dominant in his sinus. Do you know how it goes with religious people? Or like, not religious, I mean, it's not the fault of religion, but like deeply repressed people. They do tend to talk nasal. Like, you know how they go. They do it.
Related to something?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we were looking for the emotion that was tensing his throat, and as we were testing the opposite, he told me, no, this feeling is way stronger. And we actually went to it, and they had two different memories, by the way, and it did put them as two different self-ReiK sheets. You are going to enjoy it when we talk about it. So, but what I'm saying right here, what's relevant in here, is that we have to determine this dominant emotion, because we might sometimes start with something, and there's a possibility as we talk a little further and try to examine the feeling, there's a possibility that we will find that there is something more dominant or like that's stronger than to work or better to work with.
Or here it was the body sensation which was more dominant, and from there you would detect the emotion.
Yeah, and that particular case, because I was working with the physical ReiK.
Yeah, okay.
So I was working with the physical ReiK, which makes me start with the muscular tension first. Okay, but this is advanced. We didn't even talk about this with the current practitioners, by the way. So this is the first time we actually discussed this, and we're coming with a lot in regards to this. Okay. So to continue, so this is why there's a whole chapter, there is a whole step, okay, for determining the dominant emotion, because it is important. In some cases, it's very simple, but in many cases, we have to dig further to determine the most proper emotion to work with. Okay, so sometimes it gets trickier, of course. If there were numerous emotions involved, like we said, we will choose the most dominant emotion to work with. So as a therapist, try to avoid vague terms. We cannot accept vague terms. So if someone tells me, for example, I feel depressed. Depression is a very vague term and it carries with it a lot of emotions, a lot of reasons. We cannot work with that. If someone tells me I am mad at my mom, for example, that's a specific thing we can work with. If someone tells me I'm depressed because I don't feel I look good, that's something I can work with. That's a trauma I can work with. But just depressed, that's a very vague term. Okay? So try to navigate further to reveal the reason behind the depression, for example, feeling unloved, having a problem with being overweight, etc., etc. So I think I did continue with the exemplifying session in here, which actually the emotion in there is extremely simple. So it did not take a lot of work. So basically, I'm just saying the feeling involved is extremely clear. So I'm saying what physical sensations, maybe sometimes I would ask the patient about the physical sensations. So I would say, what physical sensations do you get as you imagine being in that dark place with this creature coming to haunt you? He told me it's like my body is paralyzed, electricity rushing through my entire body. I can't breathe properly. I feel extremely afraid. So he's just explaining to me, I just did this as an extra step. Okay, in this specific case, it's not really very significant. But we did establish that the person is actually afraid. Okay, so this is the emotion we're gonna we're gonna work with, which means I'm gonna go backwards in time and ask him, when was the first time you felt afraid in the dark? So this is what I want actually. I want to establish a clear emotion to go backwards with in order to get to the pre-state. Great.
So because here I read something in the book that you choose something from his mid-age, let's say, or in the middle, then you go to the first state. Or do you just check the pre-state? Maybe it will not be the first state and then go further.
It varies. Okay, sometimes we would choose an intermediate scenario to solidify the emotion. Sometimes we wouldn't. Sometimes we would throw the argument, sometimes we wouldn't. Sometimes we would throw the argument in the beginning, sometimes we would throw it as we attempt to get to the pre-state. So there's no specific time for it, but we will judge based on the session itself.
Yeah, okay. If you're sure that this is the emotion, then you just go to the pre-state. And if you're not,
if I don't need,
double check with other.
any further. Exactly.
Okay.
Based on the case. Sometimes he would tell me, yeah, the most recent incident was X and Y, this and that happened. I would feel that things are not still extremely clear. So I would tell him, give me another scenario where you experienced it and tell me what happened. So I would compare between them just to make sure that it's the exact same thing that we should be working with.
Okay.
Yeah. And it also helps actually later when we do the, we'll talk about it in the, I think it's the 6th step. We will navigate through the timeline. So we have the most recent incident, we have an incident in the middle, and we have the first incident, and we have the pre-state, right?
Yeah.
So once we access the pre-state, we would solidify the resolution by just moving through the different timelines and testing his feeling against what happened then. So it does help also having the middle incident. It does help also in this way.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if there were more than an incident in the middle, you just choose one, not necessarily all of them, and keep jumping to pre-state, intermediate, and the recent one.
Absolutely. And if you felt that you need to choose another incident, really, why not? It depends on you. Yeah, it depends on you and on the session, the flow of the session. Okay, so step 3, establish a strong logical argument. It doesn't, like we said, it doesn't necessarily have to be right now. So now we have a recent incident, and of course we have the first incident, okay? Right now we are at this point, and we have a middle incident. If we choose to go to one or to mention one. So as I go now, this patient explained the problem to me in the beginning of the session. Then he told me about a recent incident. Then maybe he's telling me about a middle incident. Okay, but I will be throwing logical arguments. I can throw it here. I can throw it here. I can throw it when we go to the first incident. I can throw it if we are trying to access the pre-state and the patient is resistant. I can throw a logical argument. So it doesn't have to necessarily be at this stage. It can go anytime, whenever is proper. But for the sake of practicality, we have it as step number 3, establish a good logical argument. And usually this is a good time to establish the argument. So before the therapist can proceed, it's usually essential to silence the mind and the unconscious resistance of the patient with a strong argument. Do you remember the case that I told you about that involved the resistant patient? If I wouldn't have been able to continue with the session if I did not silence his argument. I had to win, because otherwise nothing productive would have been attained. So establishing a good argument will not be enough to resolve the trauma. However, it will serve well to overcome any hindrances caused by false beliefs, as well as bring in a new foundation that will take place once the trauma is tackled successfully. So when we tackle the trauma by going to the pre-state, okay, immediately the logical arguments that we spoke of earlier, if they were good, they will be a great foundation for this patient to resort to.
Yeah, usually they repeat it after that. Yeah,
exactly. Yes. They repeat it as if it's their own thing. Usually, this is this is the case. Yeah. So we have to be very intelligent in the way we throw things. So the argument must undoubtedly be presented elegantly and should also make perfect sense to the patient. So to go with an example. So this patient, the same patient who's afraid of the dark, I'm telling him, you know that these monsters and creatures do not exist, right? Now, I know that this is not an argument. I know that it will never work. Because, I mean, someone is afraid of monsters, and I would tell them, why are you afraid of monsters? I mean, they do not exist. I know for a fact that it will not resolve this problem because the thing is unconscious. It's based on a trauma, it's unconscious. So he told me, yes, of course, I know that. Plus, you're not a kid anymore. I'm throwing just another thing in here. He laughed. So this is just an introduction to my argument. So I'm telling him, so why are you afraid of the dark then? I'm not really presenting an argument. I'm just making conversation to listen to what he's going to say, to figure out some slips of tongue of his, okay? To figure out the real reasons. So he told me it's scary when it's completely dark, I guess. I keep getting visuals of things coming out from the dark corners of the room. Plus, I believe that demons do exist. Now he threw in a very important word for me. I do believe that demons do exist and can haunt people. So this is very valid. And a lot of people are afraid of the dark because of this reason. So this is a sensitive topic because it involves religion, and you need to know the background of the person in order to know how to present your arguments correctly. So as it's tied to theological belief, the therapist has to be very intelligent in presenting his following argument. So the words that I chose as I spoke to this person were, I told him, but even if demons do exist, because in religion we do believe that they do exist, but even if they do exist, they aren't capable of hurting someone physically, as the nature of their existence is completely different and irrelevant to this physical world. So a lot of actually religious people talk about this and explain this, that whatever the things that we hear about demons haunting people and using their bodies, etc., is actually impossible because they do function in a different realm. It doesn't work this way. So this argument can work, and sometimes it doesn't. I have to be, again, intelligent. So another argument that I actually use right now, whenever I have people who experience this problem, involves asking them about their belief in God. Usually in our area, luckily, people do believe in God and they do believe in the Almighty. So when you tell them, for example, okay, even if the demons do exist, and I mean, God is all. Even if a demon exists, this demon does not have any power over God, over the power of God. And they, of course, they would say, yeah, definitely. And I would tell them, if you are a believer in God, you know that if you say just one verse of the Holy Book, okay, of the Quran, and in all the Kutub Samawiyya, we know that to be true. So if you say just one verse, this demon cannot actually handle being in the presence of such light. So it will run away. So if you really believe in God, if you can prove that you believe in God, you should believe that you are protected with this just by saying these simple words, because you are a believer in God and because the power of God surpasses all these creatures that God created, actually. So it's like a test of belief. This person now is trapped. See, it's a very intelligent argument, because this person is trapped. This person knows that I would never say that I do not believe in God. And if I really believe in God, I should know better. I should know that if I say Bismillah Rahman Rahim, whatever demon is there will go away. So they're their belief is almost questioned, okay, in a very intelligent way. So the argument works. It really works. Of course, the trauma is not resolved then, although sometimes it is resolved partially, like we said, if you provide a very wise argument. But this will serve as a great foundation to go backwards and figure out and find the traumatic event that began that problem for that person. So the patient started to loosen up a little. Let's say I gave him some good arguments and he loosened up a little. They made sense to him and we were able to continue to go for the trauma. See, this is why it's important to throw a good logical argument, but we do need to experience the pre-state or to experience the correct emotion, if I may say, correct emotion. If someone is afraid of cats and I told them, but cats are not scary, cats would not hurt you, that argument would never work unless I'm able to summon the correct emotion by either choosing the right words or by going to the original trauma and accessing the pre-state. See, there are different ways to do this, but we have a very practical tool to apply that really works in most cases. And with experience, we can build on that. So now we're ready to go for the first incident. You have established a recent incident. We might have had established another middle incident, and we are ready to utilize the blind procedure to go for the first incident. So step number 4, go back to the first incident. After you determine the dominant emotion, you will need to take the patient backwards into the very first time this emotion was ever experienced. Yes, there was a trauma, and this trauma is what caused the chain reaction afterwards. Okay, so at this point, the person was happy, was okay, no problem present. And when the trauma happened, everything changed afterwards. And now is the time to go back and figure out the first time things have happened. So the patient will have to go backwards in stages, utilizing a few mediating incidents. See, this is the mediating incident that we were talking about. It's not necessary, but sometimes it's very helpful. We will choose based on the session. So sometimes we utilize one or few mediating incidents from the past until the one that actually caused the problem is identified. Okay, because also sometimes we would ask the patient when was the first time, and we would utilize the blind procedure and get into an incident. And when we ask the person, are you saying that before this, 10 seconds before this time, you had no problem with X and Y? And sometimes the patient says, no, actually, no, I did have the problem before. And then we would utilize the blind procedure yet again to figure out another incident until the patient tells us, few seconds before, I'm pretty certain I did not have the problem, which makes it the first incident. So the patient will have to go backwards in stages. Sometimes we utilize mediating events. The patient will say that he or she can't remember the first incident. If the person says he cannot remember, we can utilize, of course, the blind procedure, like we said, to figure out the first time the problem has happened. And in this specific case, we did present the blind procedure. So, as we explained the blind procedure earlier, we did actually present an example that spoke of this specific case. So when you succeed in going backwards to the first event, establish the surrounding as accurately as you can by asking questions about the time of day, the people around, the sounds, colors, the objects, and visuals that are related to that memory. You'll mostly be utilizing the blind procedure, okay? So, for example, when we ask the person the questions that we present with the blind procedure, we will tell him, okay, now you are in the first time that right now you are imagining being at the first incident, which means few minutes earlier, few seconds earlier, the problem did not exist. So we will do our best to get as many specific things about that scenario to again solidify the emotion that's being experienced. So let's say I told the person to go to the first incident. He told me, as in this case, he told me I was in bed in my room. I would say what time of day, let's say, for example, 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. Sorry. Let's say, for example, 9 p.m. I would say, for example, where were you in bed? Any certain sensations. In different cases, I might ask, do you smell something? Was there a specific smell? describe the room around you, anything that will help us solidify how the person feels, how that the person is really imagining being at that point in time and place. So make sure the patient is not just remembering. We don't want, this is what I'm trying to say. We don't want the patient to remember. Yeah, I remember this and that. We want the person to experience the emotion as if it's happening right now. Like go backwards, you're in there, look around you, what do you see, who's around you, any sensations, smells, etc. We want to see the facial gestures. We want to see that the person's actually experiencing being at that place. So in this specific case, the patient established that he's afraid of the dark, and we did perform the blind procedure earlier, as we explained. And we did figure out an incident where he was at his cousin's house in his childhood. I think his age was 5, if I remember correctly. And they saw a tape of Michael Jackson's Thriller, and he was afraid because he saw him transforming into a werewolf. And due to that, he was afraid ever after. The night afterwards, he was afraid as he tried to sleep in bed. So that was the product of the blind procedure. And now we have an incident which we can work with to go to the pre-state. And earlier, we have also established in the previous steps a good logical argument. So if we go back briefly, see, we did start with a recent incident. So based on that, we did determine the dominant emotion. And afterwards, we gave him a good argument. And then we used the blind procedure to figure out the first incident. Now we are ready to experience the pre-state. So step number 5. Now we have the timeline and we have the first incident. And what we need to do is move backwards a little further. We will move backwards a little further in order to have him experience how he actually felt the night before this incident, seeing the tape that was scary to this kid. So now that you've successfully established an initial event and got a confirmation from the patient that it's the first time to have those feelings present, you will begin to ask the patient to go backwards just a little bit further. You need to make sure that the patient is absolutely certain that he or she had felt completely fine before this first event, even if it meant moving backwards in time for mere seconds. Now that's the key. We have a timeline. Okay? This is the first incident. The patient must tell me, even if it was a minute before, even if it was seconds before, the patient has to tell me, yeah, few seconds before it, if I experienced that, I wouldn't have felt afraid. Once we get that confirmation, we can proceed. So now that you've successfully established, you need to make sure that the patient is absolutely certain that he or she has felt completely fine before the first event. Once the therapist gets that confirmation, he or she will then ask the patient to talk a little about the details of whatever was happening at the time. If the patient failed to remember, the therapist can reaffirm that the accuracy of the information is not very important and that the patient can say whatever comes to mind. For example, now we're going backwards a little bit just to see how the person feels. Okay? How just to summon the pre-state. So I'm telling this person, imagine as if you're now at a point in time that preceded that moment where you got surprised by that scene in the movie in mere minutes. So now this is the point where you saw the movie few minutes earlier. I wanted to imagine going to that point in time and just to imagine being there. What were you doing? See, now that's another good thing to do. It's an important thing to do. What were you doing? In order to summon the pre-state, this is extremely important. In order to summon the pre-state, we need the person to we need to establish as many details again as possible. So I'm asking him, what were you doing? Look around you. Close your eyes. Just look around you. Who's around you? What do you see? What were you doing? Because this will help the patient experience the pre-state correctly by establishing these details. So if you can't remember exactly, it's completely fine. Just say whatever comes to your mind. For example, I'm telling him, okay, we're back to the first incident. You're sitting at your cousin's house. For example, close your eyes. What time is it? Maybe like maybe 4 p.m. maybe. I'll then ask, for example, who's around you? And this person said, my mom, my aunt, my cousin, etc. And then I would ask, what were you doing few minutes before the incident? I would even ask him to look around the room. What were you doing exactly? This is usually where the magic happens, actually, because there is a moment where this person is able to recall how it felt before the incident. Remember that ever after, this person is afraid of the dark. During the time before, he was not. And he forgot how it feels. He forgot how it feels to be not afraid of the dark. He doesn't recall being that person. He doesn't recall how it feels to not be afraid of the dark. So this is my task. When we go backwards to the pre-state and I get an incident that's pretty close to that incident, few seconds even earlier, and I ask that person to look around and summon the emotions that were present there during that time. Usually at that moment, the sense of relaxation or the instantaneous relaxation happens. The moment this person recalls how it actually felt before they developed the problem. See? So this is a very effective way to actually access the pre-state. So I'm not pretty sure how we ended up in the discussion. So let's recall where were we before that. Describe to me the exact moment. Okay, so we're explaining going backwards a little further to access the pre-state, and we were explaining how we have to go through as many details as possible to make sure that the person really experiences the emotion correctly. So now, this is what I'm doing in this exemplifying case. What I'm saying is, imagine as if you're now at a point in time that preceded that moment where you got surprised by that scene in the movie in mere minutes. What were you doing? If you can't remember exactly, it's completely fine. Just say whatever comes to mind. So simply, I just want him to imagine being before that moment, and I want him to just imagine being there and to tell me, close his eyes and tell me, how he feels just looking around and seeing people around him. I'm trying to summon the pre-state. So at this point, the therapist tries to make the patient experience how it felt when he or she once lived without feeling inconvenienced by the problem. And now you know, guys, that it's really about the summoning the pre-state. I can do it by utilizing the steps we're talking about, and I can sometimes just do it by giving very intelligent arguments to the patient. Sometimes, there are different ways to do it, but what we actually want is to summon the pre-state or to experience the emotion that was there and that makes sense to the patient, and that is an irrefutable proof, unconscious proof, that there was a time when the problem did not exist, and to have the patient re-experience that time. Okay? So at this point, the therapist tries to make the patient experience, blah, blah, blah. And when the patient succeeds in doing that, you will almost immediately begin to notice clear signs of relief. Now, that's what we call the instantaneous relaxation. The moment the patient is successful in just experiencing that feeling that was present before the problem was there, we will notice a sense of relaxation in the muscular system. We will see that there's something happens. And the most magical part about it is that the therapist also experiences that. And even if they were not looking at each other, and even if they were silent during this process, the therapist would also, and maybe we can't explain it, but there's a whole science that they call radionics that speaks of this. So the therapist will be able to feel that the change did happen. A change did happen at this point. So this is what we call the instantaneous relaxation, and it's the mark that the trauma has been tackled. It's the mark that the perception has been changed and altered at least by 40-60% maybe from the first time.
So Mohammed, I missed this part, the adiomics.
Radionics, yes.
Radionics, okay.
Radionics, yeah, it's a whole science here. It's a whole science that speaks about what's the right word for it? Because I don't like to talk about vague terms that do not have specific and clear proofs. But if I may explain it in a way that's logical to everybody, you know that sometimes you think of someone, and this person suddenly calls you on the phone, right?
Yeah, it's happened.
Exactly. So this is the connection okay, and the influence that we would call, for example, radionics, okay? But people who study the science are doing a lot of strange things with that. For example, I would, in the words of some scientists like Ruth Braun or Huda Clark or similar scientists, they would get a plate with, for example, a piece of hair, for example, and can get a bit scary, connect it to a device, a frequency device, and just be able to transfer change to the person who's distant in another place on the planet.
Yeah, that
Do you
gives explanation for some of the sciences that they speak about all the time, the quantum physics and in tapping, there is something I cannot even recall the term, but it is tapping for someone who is not present. He's away, and it was giving results for others, and I didn't have an explanation. I said, this is something not real. So I think, okay.
In terms of being real, it is definitely, there are the signs that prove that it's real, okay?
Okay, yes.
But we do not like to speak about something that we cannot prove at the moment. So we will keep researching until we find like things that we can rely on as evidence, more evidence, without things being extremely subjective.
So do you recommend any books about the radionics? Radionics, this is the term?
Okay, so if you want to study radionics, you might as well check out Albert Abrams. This is the father of radionics. Okay, so his scientific approach is extremely interesting because he used to utilize it also to cure diseases. He basically cured diseases with it. And he had a very interesting approach where he would tap on the stomach and see the sound change by, for example, changing the direction of the. So I think his experiments started with that, but it did develop to a lot of things. Ruth Braun, for example, a student of his, I believe. Ruth Braun. Okay.
Sorry, can you say them again, Mohammed? I just want to research them.
I'm writing
Albert.
Okay. Albert Abrams, dear. Ruth Braun.
John.
No, Braun. I think there's an E there. So Ruth Braun, a student of his. Look at that. So she actually she died heartbroken. Why? Because at the end of her life, she did an experiment where they were like pilots. They were planes, free pilots, etc. She, at her office, using her machine, was able to get all the details of the vital signs of the pilots, their heart rate, their etc., etc. She was able to get the information. And then to prove that radionics is real, she sent the information, I think, to the FBI or whatever. And what happened is they went and confiscated all she had. They prevented her from working, and they said she was a spy. How did you get the information? She was telling them, radionics, this is how I got the information. So they did not believe her, and she died heartbroken. Can you imagine? Yeah, she did a lot of great things. This woman is a philosopher of the first degree, فظيعة. She's unbelievably amazing. You can read the book that she collected and elaborated on, called Wisdom from Atlantis, if you can find it. I did collect all these books 20 years ago, actually, from sources that were extremely hard to find.
Yeah, I think they would hide these kind of resources.
Now you probably would find them on the internet, but back then, I had to get in touch with specific people to get the information. Yeah. All right. So I'm telling him, imagine if, as if you're now at a point in time that preceded the moment. I'm having him summon as many details as possible. At this point, the therapist tries to make the patient experience how it felt when he or she once lived without feeling inconvenienced by the problem. So we do understand. I'm trying to summon the pre-state. When the patient succeeds in doing that, you will almost notice an instantaneous relaxation, which we spoke of, which is the indication that the trauma has been successfully tackled. And as we said, nearly 60% immediately from the first attempt, is resolved. Because the perception really changes once we are able to summon that emotion. And this is a treasure beyond description. So, this involuntary state of relief that occurs once the patient realizes that he or she has not always lived under the influence of the problem is the key to realizing this method correctly. Accessing the pre-state, the emotion correctly, is basically the right method. And the session is not considered successful unless this is accomplished to a reasonable extent. And it's the mark that the perception of the patient has truly been altered. So, to elaborate with the example. In this case, I told the patient, describe to me the exact moment that shocked you. So I'm going backwards and summoning the emotion that happened during the first incident, the incident of the trauma. As you saw that scene from the video, when was the exact moment that shocked you to the core? And he told me, he specified the moment. It was at the time his eyes turned yellow as he turned his face in the beginning of the video. I was not expecting something like this, and I was extremely shocked by it. He was just looking at a video, and the actor turned his face. Once he turned his face, his eyes were yellow, and that shocked him because he was not expecting it, which is how traumas work. Are you saying that, now I'm confirming that this is actually the first time. Are you saying that before this very moment, before he turned his head and you saw his eyes turn yellow, you had absolutely no fears of sleeping in the dark? Would you say that this was the very first time for this fear to enter your life? So are you telling me that right before it, you did not have this fear at all in your life? I just want the confirmation. So he told me, I can say so. Yes. Bingo. That's what I want. All I want is for him to confirm that this is the first time, which will enable me to summon the feelings that were present before that. So summon the pre-state. I think the word pre-state has to be trademarked. It's a word that's just specific to the ReiK method. I don't think it's used anywhere else, which is cool. Okay, so he confirmed that this is the moment. Then I told him, wonderful, I want you now to imagine yourself reliving a time briefly before that moment. The head is still turning. See, I did not utilize at this point the night before. I utilized as the actor is turning his face. Like, he still did not turn his face. He's still turning like a flash of a second. It's less than 1 second. So he's still turning, and you have not yet seen his eyes turn yellow. How were you feeling at that moment before he turned his face? And he told me, I felt completely normal. I was just sitting with my cousin and watching the movie. Can you feel, guys, as I say this, you also can actually feel a kind of relief, right? So it's weird. It is really weird, but it's true. This is radionics, and in other words. So as the moment he just told me the words, I felt completely normal. He's remembering how it felt back then. And this is actually resolving the trauma. This is actually touching on the trauma. If the patient can experience this pre-state correctly, the trauma will immediately begin to dissolve in part or in full, which is why the therapist needs to bring in few more details. It's good for me to bring in few more details to have him remember more and more of the emotions that were there. So I thought, okay, who was around you at that point? He said my mom and my aunt were with us. We were all watching TV. Of course, he remembers now that he was happy at the time. He was sitting, probably eating something. He was happy at the time. So he started to smile as he said that. At that point, the thought of being afraid of the dark had absolutely no place in your life, right? He said, yes. At that point, I had no fear of the dark. Would you have felt any discomfort if you stepped in complete darkness before that day? And he said and confirmed, no, I don't think I would have. So we did touch on the trauma. We were successful in doing that. So now I told him, wonderful. I want you to move just a day backwards in time. I want you to imagine the night before, imagine being in bed, looking at the darkness around you. Do you feel anything doing that? So I asked him to do that. And do you think that you would be able to feel completely comfortable looking at the dark space just as a baby does? I exemplified with a baby. Like a baby just looks at the dark place. I acted it in front of him. Look at the baby looks at the darkness, he sleeps. It means nothing. It means absolutely nothing to the baby. So will you be able, if you imagined yourself being at the night before, will you be able to feel, and do you think you're gonna be able to feel this way? And he said, I think I would, yes. As you've seen right now, really, his perception did change. And this person actually did resolve most of the trauma, okay, just with this simple procedure that we did, okay? He did come afterwards, and we did work on some jinn issues, and along with other stuff as well. But we did basically resolve at least 60-70% of the problem just by doing the procedure that you just saw in front of you. So he had his eyes closed, and the muscles of his face were getting more relaxed as he imagined looking at that dark space. This is the mark. Once the patient admits that he was fine before that moment and experiences the pre-state for a flash of a second, the trauma immediately begins to dissolve, and his perception also begins to change, enabling him to feel more comfortable in the future when the same problem is encountered. And that's what happened. So this is, guys, how we actually, there are different ways to access the pre-state. And this is the practical way that we've compiled into steps. So with experience, we can do it in different ways, but this is extremely practical and extremely, it's time tested as well. Okay, the way we do it this way. So we're going to be doing a lot of exercises, and we're going to try different ways to access the pre-states as we go through some different cases, whether live with all of you or by reading some of the cases in the book. So behold, and be ready for that. Okay, guys, so we are now at step 6. And as you've seen, we basically did what we needed to do. We did access the pre-state, and the patient did experience the relief. And probably if we just ended the session there, great results would have been attained already. But there's something very interesting that happens when we do this procedure, which was compiled into step number 6. The title is Play Around the Timeline. What we do is, like we said, we have a timeline, right? So the patient came and he told us, or she told us about the problem they're facing, and we asked about the most recent incident. We summoned the emotion. We maybe placed some arguments. We asked about one or maybe some mediating incidents if we needed to. And then we utilized the blind procedure, and we figured out the first incident, and we went for the pre-state, experienced the emotion that was present before the problem happened for the first time, experienced the relief, saw the instantaneous relaxation, and basically tackled the trauma in part or in full. So why do we do this? Why do we play around the timeline? Simply because when you actually try to do that, and you will see we will be doing this also when we talk about the ReiK procedure. When we play around the timeline, it's very common for the relief to increase. For example, let's say the patient experienced a relief, 60% relief when we access the emotion that was present at the pre-state. And just by going through the timeline, we will usually see that it can easily increase to 90%. We will improve the results just by navigating through different incidents. Now that's one product of what we do. But the other thing that this accomplishes as well is testing this patient's feelings against the different incidents that we talked about beforehand in the session. So let's say this patient was afraid of the dark, or let's say a patient is afraid of heights. Okay, and I asked him, when was the first time you felt really afraid of heights? And supposedly he was on a trip and he was going through a bridge or whatever, and he felt extremely paralyzed going through that experience. And this was the most recent experience. Let's say I asked him about another experience. Tell me about another time that you felt afraid of the dark. And supposedly he gave me another incident, during which, for example, he was riding an elevator, a glass elevator, and he looked down and he was really afraid. He handled himself, but he was afraid. So let's say he gave me another experience. And then we went to the first event, and he gave me the time where he first felt this fear of heights. So now we will go before that. We will access the pre-state. Perhaps maybe one day he was with his family in a theme park, riding, a roller coaster or something that's meant for kids, and he was enjoying it and he was happy. And although it was high, but he was next to his parents and he was enjoying it. So we went for a pre-state, and we did see that he felt better about the problem and his perception began to change. Now it's time to do some testing. I'll take him back to the most recent incident, and I will tell him, imagine reliving it. Imagine being there. Imagine passing through the bridge and look at the scene from that perspective. How do you feel? Probably he would, okay, I'll just act it out. Let's say this patient is closing his eyes and he's trying to imagine being on that bridge and he's looking, see, I still feel some sense of fear, like doing that. It's still scary to me, even though we did access the pre-state. So this commonly happens, okay? I would simply ask him, do you feel as afraid as you did before? And it's very common for him to say, not as afraid. I do feel a sense of rush. I am afraid, but it's not like before. Before that, I felt paralyzed. It was a debilitating fear. I felt paralyzed just imagining, looking through that scene. So he would experience, for example, now this is where the interesting part happens. We have this timeline, we have the most recent, we have an immediating event, and we have the first event, right? So we did access the pre-state, and he did feel better. And when I went to retest things with the most recent event and asked him to look around, he did confirm that, I do feel a rush. I am scared. I do feel that, but it's not as intense as it was before. Here's the interesting part. Just by navigating back and forth. Okay, so I wouldn't really stress things out. I would just move in time. Okay, the mediating event. Just imagine yourself in the elevator, glass elevator, and look around you from that perspective. How do you feel? And he will be like, better actually. I feel better actually. And I think all of you right now, as I just spoke the words, felt that there's something changed, right? You have to admit that this happened right now, right?
Yes.
Great. Because this is how it works. It's completely unconscious. It's a
feeling in the heart, I feel sometimes.
Feeling in the heart changes.
Like
and it changes.
Wave. Yes.
See? And now you will see, Osama, now let's go backwards with the patient as if he's there right now here with us. And let's experience the bridge again. You are on the bridge and you're looking from that perspective. How do you feel? You guys, the guys with me. How do you feel? You feel that something changed.
Yes.
When I asked just briefly before, you saw what happened. Okay, this is strange, but it works. So we have the bridge event, we have the elevator event, and we have the first event, right? We accessed the pre-state and you felt better. But right now, you've witnessed when we went and retested with the bridge, almost all of you felt a rush in the heart, okay? As if you were the patient, right?
Yes.
You did feel that. Great.
Right.
So when I went for the elevator event and I acted out the patient, experiencing what happened then, you all felt that, no, I don't really feel afraid. There's no rush. صح? Right?
I didn't focus on that, but immediately with the recent one, I feel that electric wave even.
Something happened, exactly. Yeah. And now, if I go forward again and I ask the patient, see, I'm acting it out, but this is what's happening. I don't know how it works, but it works. So I'm coming backwards, forward in time, and I'm asking the patient, okay, now you're on the bridge and look down. How do you feel? I think all of you agree with me that the rush that you guys felt briefly before is not there now, right?
Yes.
صح?
Yes. Yeah.
Again, I don't know how it works, but it does. It's unconscious. It's an unconscious procedure. And this was actually the discovery that happened to me when I was doing that exercise way in the past. I noticed that something different happens. I can't explain exactly why it's why it works the way it does.
What if the patient experiences shift in the intermediate event, but didn't agree that there's a shift? And that's I'm speaking about the case that we already shared together. So when I checked these recurrent, it wasn't one recurrent incident. She was saying, I feel a little shift, but with the recent one, no, I'm still having the same feelings. So do you feel like, we have to go again to the pre-state and check and...
Possibly, dear. There are several things there are a few things you can do, okay?
Or since there's certainly a shift, and you saw the relaxing, maybe I can't remember even if.
Yeah, sometimes the problems are a bit complicated. Okay, they're not just single emotion, different things. Sometimes they're extremely strong. Sometimes they're mild. They're not really very strong. So it varies. Okay, but there are things we can do. Okay, first, if you keep moving and testing things after accessing the pre-state, if you keep moving to the different scenarios and have, for example, I would have the patient, you're on the bridge, look downwards. How do you feel? It's like afraid, but less afraid. And go, okay, let's go to the first event. You are there, you're looking downwards. Is the fear still there? You would be much less. I would say, go to the pre-state. How did you feel back? How did you feel then? It's like, I was happy. I was really happy in the theme park and I was happy. And I would go, okay, back to the bridge, look downwards. How do you feel? It's like, much less afraid, almost no fear. So we can do that actually. We can keep moving and testing against different timeline, different points in time. Okay, but this is why we established the events, because we need that to test.
So even if you did that and still the recent event, there's no shift.
Yeah. So this is one thing we can do. Yeah. This is one thing we can do. Just navigating if we are certain that the pre-state was accessed successfully.
Yeah.
This is one thing we can do. The other thing, of course, during the time we're doing that, we might notice that, for example, we did not solidify experiencing the pre-state correctly. Maybe we notice that it's good to throw some logical arguments as we speak. Maybe we would see that there's actually another event that we have to go backwards towards. Okay, maybe we would see that this person, for example, has a problem forgiving. It's not about the trauma.
Yeah, I think
you see that. You see that sometimes, yeah, sometimes that's a problem. He or she has a problem forgiving. It's not really about the trauma. See, because I know that
there's something that is resolved, but still the forgiveness may be part.
The forgiveness part is the block that remains there when we are dealing with anything related to introverted narcissism.
Then you go back in the other session, checking the incident, what's still bothering you about this, and going further.
This is why when we are faced with this problem, we have to perform the reverse ReiK until we make sure that the person is capable of forgiving, or is capable of clearing the heart, and at the same time is capable of practicing it when they go back and they get exposed to the source of the problem.
Yeah, I think this is the missing part. I didn't do that forgiveness or clearing up.
Yeah. So this is what makes this trauma, the narcissism trauma, different compared to others. Why? Because if I have a fear of animals, if I have a fear of heights, if I have a fear of elevators, etc., there's no one to forgive. It's just a trauma.
So is it possible that someone is an extrovert and then for a couple of years he became an introvert because of some incidents? I'm speaking about myself, by the way. When I read the book, I realized that, yeah, you have narcissism. I'm telling everyone in the family, I'm having narcissism and this and this and this. But when you are speaking about being an extrovert, I was extremely an extrovert. Then lots of things happened in my life. Then I made that, what I call it, the divine pose. It wasn't a bad pose because I saw the results after that. I accomplished lots of things. I wouldn't have accomplished this if I was still in the relations that I was there. So I realized, yeah, I have a narcissism. Let's say, if I want to say it in Arabic, لما نحكي طيف من التوحد نفس الشيء اللي بحكي طيف من النارسيسيزم. ف there is, بس يعني it is. I don't know. You tell me. You can be an extrovert, then go into introvert, then go back to extrovert without even relieving the trauma or without working on it.
Shufi, not usually. It's not the common case. The common case is an introvert begins, that the problem of introversion begins around, let's say, 4 or 5 years old, usually. Okay. So before that time, بيكونوا spontaneous. But something happened. They are hit with narcissism. That's basically one of the primary things that happen. Sometimes it's related to family problems, which makes them feel unsafe. Sometimes it's related to narcissism. They decide, because of what they're told at the time. For example, the father tells the kid, "You are different. You are the good one. You are the good person." Just by saying these words, it's a disaster.
Yeah.
Why? Because this person will have to
Think
live up.
different. Yes.
He will have to live up to being different and special,
Yeah.
right? Which will make this person feel guilty all the time, which will make him a narcissist, which will make him separate himself from other people, which will make him judge other people. See, a lot of things happen with that.
So even
That's
if
the
you're
premise.
an introvert, this is what you're saying, and you went through this narcissism, let's say 3 years, that means there's an origin there in the
Not
childhood.
necessarily, no, dear. It can
Okay.
happen. It can happen. For example, if you're shocked to the core with a great disappointment, maybe yes, you would become introverted for a while until you trust people again. But the interesting part, even narcissism, the interesting part is that usually during that time, you will tend to go for ideologies. See, just like we said, you will notice that just by doing the time shifting, the one we just talked about, okay, just by doing the time shifting, okay, and testing things against the different events on the timeline, you'll notice that the procedure also helps loosen the resistance of persistent trauma. Sometimes the person, by accessing the pre-state, would tell me, yeah, I feel good, but it's like 40%. It's almost guaranteed that if you just shifted and retested things against different events, the same way we just did, it's very, very common for this percentage to increase to 80 or 90% in just mere minutes. And this is definitely extremely significant. So this is what I was just talking about. Playing around the timeline for a short while afterwards will almost always do so, will help increase the percentage of the relief. So it's done simply by jumping randomly through different events and asking the patient to verbalize his or her feelings regarding the problems as they imagine being at that point in time, just like we did just now. The targeted events are mainly the same drawing that I just had. The targeted events are the moment the patient got traumatized for the first time. So there's the timeline. This is the first time he got traumatized. At the time briefly that preceded the moment, the pre-state moment, a recent event, which is the last time the problem happened, and any mediating events that we choose, however it goes through the session. Another random event that comes to the patient's mind. So we always ask open-ended questions when we talk to patients, like, give me the last time, give me another event that comes to mind, because this will stimulate the unconscious mind to give us memories that are relevant, or whatever is relevant to the emotions of the patient. So the therapist should keep doing this procedure until the patient seems completely comfortable imagining being at those various events without having any signs of distress. So we can just keep navigating until we feel satisfied that, yeah, this patient is comfortable enough imagining these scenarios, and it seems that he has relaxed enough, which enables us to move to the last step and ask the patient to test himself against real life to see what happens, how he perceives the problem from now on. So to continue with the example.
Somehow, just let me interrupt you here. If you have a client who has a scientific base, do you explain even the procedure, because they are always curious, what's happening, what did you do, what is this? So do you explain that, yeah, we're connecting the unconscious with it?
I would also. It's different from a therapist to another, but yes, I would love for the patient to always understand exactly what I'm doing.
Good.
Yeah, it's respecting actually the mind of the patient, and it's better for the patient to understand, yeah, why we're doing this, because this will do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It makes sense. It makes things actually more logical.
Because with some people, it will make the opposite. It will make resistance, because if they are coming from a scientific background, they want to prove, yeah, this is wrong. No, it didn't happen. They will not be with the natural flow of the session.
It depends on the patient, Osama. But I can tell you that most of the patients will actually cooperate and will appreciate doing that. Yeah, most of the patients, practically speaking. I promise you guys, I'll find a way to fix this tomorrow.
I have the same problem, by the way, by my camera, but my husband fixed that. He's not here. I would yeah.
I did click the button that disables tracking. It just keeps coming back. I don't know why.
Yeah. And some clients, they said it is like hypnotizing, because I move a lot with my hands all the time. So it's all the time moving, but it is fixed now.
Yeah. Now that's a problem. Great. Okay, so let's continue. So just continuing with the case, I'm telling the patient, go backwards in time and imagine, remember, we did access the pre-state, and now I'm telling him to go backwards in time and imagine being at the moment when you saw that horrifying scene. Look at those yellow eyes. So we did access the pre-state successfully, and now I'm going back to test his feeling. And he told me, actually, I feel more at ease about it. So we were at this is the time the trauma happened. We were at the pre-state. After we successfully saw him getting a relief, we went back, we went forward, and we retested his feeling against the event of looking at the eyes of that of the monster's face that was in the movie. And he said, actually, I feel more at ease about it. I don't feel as shocked as I did. So I'm asking him, is it as terrifying as before? He's like, no, it feels much less intense. Actually, it's like I'm looking at it and it's a scene from a movie. I don't feel much about it. So these, I think, these were his words at the time when you talked about it. So then I said, okay, imagine being in your room this very night. So I'm testing now again. See, the most, not even the most recent event. Now I'm testing his feeling against sleeping this night. So I'm telling you, imagine being in your room at this very night. It's completely dark. Look at the darkness in front around you, and you're sleeping in your bed. How do you feel looking at the darkness in front of you? Do you still feel that you fear the presence of monsters and scary creatures coming at you? And he said, not like before. No, I feel more relaxed. He's able to look at the darkness, and he's like, no, it's not as scary as before. So just to conclude the session, I said, wonderful, go backwards in time and relive the first memory of seeing I moved back again, just to test another time, to the moment he saw that monster's face. And I told him, imagine looking at that face. How do you feel? And he said, I feel completely neutral about it. I really, looking at that face, it's just a movie. I don't feel anything. So his feeling that was present a few minutes before is now completely changed. And in this specific case, of course, I didn't write all the details. In this specific case, he still had concerns in regards to demons and jinn and stuff like that, and we did talk about it later. But at that point, the fear that developed because of that scene he saw in the movie did change, and he did actually, without doing anything else, experience at least like 60-70% of change when he went to bed that night. He confirmed it, and later on we worked on whatever issues were there, and accordingly we worked on that. So to conclude, the therapist can keep switching back and forth between different events to solidify the resolution. But all in all, this is precisely what happens in almost every case. Now, the interesting part is we have a timeline, and just by doing something that it does make sense, of course, but that doesn't seem to be capable of giving us that kind of relief, just by moving and reimagining, just by doing that, and that alone, we are experiencing a great shift in relaxation. I guess that's how the unconscious mind works. So an event that might have felt utterly terrifying if to the patient becomes neutral, as if it's just an average, insignificantly passing incident by doing this time shifting with step number 6. Okay? And we'll be utilizing this also later when we speak about more details. So in here, guys, this is step number 7. Okay, step number 7 is basically concluding this session. Immerse in real life, test, and repeat when necessary. So we did go through the steps. Let's just navigate through them again quickly. First, the patient told us about the problem. We started with the recent incident. Then we, by asking several questions, by using maybe potentially testing the opposite, we determined the dominant emotion that we're going to be working with. We established some good arguments against the problem, and we utilized the blind procedure to go back to the first event. We went to the pre-state, and we saw the person change. We experienced the instantaneous relaxation by doing that. Then we moved around the timeline for a while until we solidified the resolution, and we felt that the patient is actually feeling okay, imagining all the scenarios that we discussed during the session, and maybe even more. We can test against that. So this is the time to tell the patient, okay, now I want you to go try the resolution, see it in real life, immerse, and see if the percentage of change that happened based on what we did. So usually we tell the patient, okay, test yourself for a couple of weeks and tell us how you feel afterwards. So once the resolution appears to be satisfactory, the therapist should begin to wrap up the session, asking the patient to immerse himself or herself in real life for a while in order to observe and assess the effect of those changes. Based on that, the patient can effectively identify whether the problem has been resolved or not, in order to determine the best step to follow up with, if needed, of course. Sometimes the patient would not need a follow-up. Sometimes it's okay, that's fine. And I always push in the sessions, I push the patient not to take another session, actually. I do my best to resolve what I need to resolve and ask them to take responsibility and potentially give them the tools to utilize in order to just to be self-reliant. And that's a personal choice of mine. It's very important to me to have the person become self-reliant and to be able to handle things for themselves afterwards. I'm not interested in doing a lot of prolonged sessions where we discuss details. I really don't think it's necessary. I know some traumas are more complicated, but except in rare cases, in most cases, you can put the patient on the right track from the first time. And it's completely okay if they want to take other sessions, that's completely fine, but it's our task to try and do that. So ideally, the therapist can ask the patient to make observations during a period of 2 weeks and send the feedback accordingly. Changes should feel involuntary, spontaneous in terms of the patient's reactions to the triggers that used to cause the state of distress. So the patient is not acting. The patient should feel a difference when they are exposed to the same stimuli. So let's say I'm afraid of the dark. This patient probably or did actually notice that there's still some fear, but it's really different. I mean, he was able to sleep with the light off from the first night, having a little bit of fear. Some fear was there, but he was able to do it. In the past, he wouldn't. He would just keep it on, because if he turns the light off, he's really afraid. He wouldn't be able to handle it. So to proceed with the example, it's just concluding the session. So basically, the patient from the model case revealed later that he no longer felt as bothered as before when he slept in complete darkness. However, he did notice that he still had some. Oh, see, I did write it in here. I did not remember that I did so. I thought I'm telling you something that's outside the scope of the book. So he did notice that he still had some lingering metaphysical fears of demons. Another session was scheduled, which revealed that early in his childhood, he learned about the presence of demons by a teacher at his school. The procedure was repeated, and this resolved the patient's problem. He reported afterwards that he was able to sleep in darkness without any issues. And this, my friends, is the 7th step and the 7 steps that we follow when we perform the ReiK method. As we said, we can easily make changes, switch steps, and do things as we develop experience. But the 7 steps that we have in front of us are extremely practical, time-tested, and they do work. So with experience, we will be able to maybe shift some procedure, make some changes, throw logical arguments in a different way. The target, like we said, is to access the pre-state. And like I said, also, the time shifting is important. It is it's not as important as the accessing the pre-state, but it is pretty important, and it will solidify the resolution by testing and by increasing the percentage of the relief. So this concludes the explaining the 7 steps, and now we're ready to start going through some example cases, exemplifying cases, to see how we can approach this from different